Hi, so the topic I was researching is making machine learning more robust with k-winners and sparse distributed representations, the k-winner activation function. Um, so the topic we're discussing is a sparse network layer. These are some papers that Numenta has written relating to this. Numenta is a ML research company in Redwood City, California, and their focus is almost entirely on the human neocortex because their founder, Jeff Hawkins, is really curious about why the brain evolved gyrations, became so bumpy just to give more surface area to this neocortex. And he thinks it's relevant somehow to human cognition. The key idea that we're pulling from Numenta's research here is this idea of sparse distributed representations. This is some fixed percentage of a layer's outputs are going to be active. So a layer that can have 64 cells outputting into the next layer, maybe 16 of them are active at any one time. And so this produces these sparse distributed representations that are robust to noise in machine learning. And they have something to do with our actual learning. The robustness effect comes from, first imagine having a universe of 64-bit vectors that also have 16 bits turned on. So what we were talking about on this slide. The cardinality of this set is 64 choose 16, which is 4.885 times 10 to the 14, or an absolutely huge number. So we have a large number of representations we can work with in this space. And we can pick out some exemplars from the space. Now what we're going to do is put a threshold on the exemplars. That is, anything within theta bits of overlap is considered the same thing. That is, theta of the on bits have to be the same. And so if we choose, say, theta equals 12, then there exists 16 choose 12 plus 16 choose 13 plus 16 choose 14 ... ways to have that many on bits from your overlapping patterns. And the remaining off bits are then selected by 64 minus 16 choose 16 minus 12, 13, 14, 15 as before. And so that allows us to actually know how many overlapping patterns exist in each of these sets. And so from that count of overlapping patterns, if we select a vector at random from the entire universe of patterns, then the probability of overlap for a given pattern is incredibly small because you've got a massive cardinality and you've got a much smaller cardinality of ones that overlap with having 10 of the same on bits. And so for our original choice of theta equals 12, and for our exemplars in the 64-bit array with 16 bits on, we wind up with approximately 1 in 1.3 million that a randomly selected vector is going to be considered to be the same as one of our exemplars here. Now that's a particular exemplar, obviously. If you have multiple exemplars, then the probabilities sum because the exemplars' regions don't overlap. However, even if, so this is the case for randomly selected vectors. If we get a properly selected vector, it can support 4 changes where one of the bits that should be on is turned off and one of the bits that should be off is turned on, and still be recognized as the correct thing, meaning it's got something like a 15% noise rejection right there. And we can expand theta further by increasing the cardinality of the base set, so having more than 64 features, dimensions per se. And these are all with binary vectors. Neural network-wise, most neural networks go with implementing things as real numbers, and they'll use a per neuron activation like ReLU. And that's nice because it only needs this one cell's value, but there's no inclusion of context from other neurons. And so this network proposal says let's instead have sparse activations, meaning we limit the number of cells and enforce that at least this many cells are turned on after each layer, and all other cells are set to 0, kind of like ReLU. And that translates well to real numbered neural networks, just experimentally verified. We haven't actually, proven it on any mathematic sense yet. But this whole idea comes from Numenta's model of pyramidal cells in the human neocortex, which is that there is a local context provided from neighboring neurons at a previous simulation step that is then combined with the feed-forward information to produce the result of the cell. The feedback mechanism is still under study. But this context, what it does is it tells these cells to depolarize, but not to fire. And this depolarization means they are on the verge of firing, and so feed-forward input pushes them over the edge a little bit faster. But this contextual information can't ever push them into firing. And so the classical feed-forward activity, when it arrives, what then happens is the predicting cells will fire first, and they will send inhibitive signals to all of their adjacent neighbors that didn't predict and fire first. And what that does is it allows the neurons to have this sense of context, but also to enforce sparsity, in that the ones that fire first inhibit their neighbors, and so only so many of the cells are going to fire, some percentage. That explains where the K-winners idea comes from, but the K-winners idea has this obvious issue, and that is the domination problem. If only K-winners are allowed, what happens if those K neurons are just some neurons that got huge activations or huge biases and always trigger? Then the rest of the network never learns anything, and so it can't escape that effect. The solution is to boost the inactive neurons, that is, make the inactive neurons more excitable and the active neurons less excitable. And so they use an exponential function to form this boost factor between 2 or 3 times the original value. And that boost factor is then used to do the K-winners selection. The K-winners selection forms a mask of which ones win. The actual output value is still the raw activation, just like you would get with ReLU. And the result that we get out of this is a dropout-like behavior, where the K-winners selection has dropped a number of neurons that aren't relevant to this particular sample. But unlike with dropout, where it drops at random to try to get multiple things, this drops specifically the neurons that aren't relevant to the pattern that we're trying to recognize. That is, some neurons learn to represent some patterns, others learn to represent other patterns. And so that's what pushes exemplars away from each other and allows us to get the nice benefits of that large sampling space, that robustness effect. Because as they push against each other, they try to have the same neuron firing, maybe for multiple classes that you're trying to categorize. That same neuron firing will be too excited, and so it will be forced not to fire by the boosting effect, and other neurons will have to pick up the slack and learn how to represent that, and they might pick up on features that separate them versus elements of their different classes, because if 2 different classes are recognizing the same thing, there's got to be some difference between those classes. So that forces representations to spread apart and provides for the robustness effect. I implemented the sparse layers that they were recommending. I specifically only did the boosting effect in the K-winners output. They were also suggesting sparsifying the layers. And these are my results of recreating their noise experiment. That is, I took the test data that you're supposed to use after the experiment, and I randomly sent a percentage of the pixels to an off-white color, where off-white is defined as the mean pixel intensity plus 2 standard deviations. And I swept it between 5% and 50%. You're looking at that plot now. And so the y-axis is the accuracy of the recognizers on noisy data, and the x-axis is the noise level of that data. And as is obvious, the K-winners and sparse networks all did better than a dense network of the exact same architecture and exact same training time. What I find interesting, though, and what suggests to me that I implemented the boosting wrong somehow, is that both of the networks that had boosting, best sparse and best filter sparse, did worse at the robustness, which is the opposite of what one would expect after boosting. And I don't have an explanation for that at the moment, but it was a consistent problem in performance. What's interesting though is best K winners consistently did better. And so it was clear that at least applying the K winners activation function does provide a robustness benefit. Now, sparsity is great because you get a consistent noise rejection improvement, seeing both my results and Numenta's results. And on specialized hardware, the fact that you're limiting the number of outputs that can succeed gives you a speed up because you only have to transfer so many floating point numbers to the next layer, and you can take advantage of sparse matrix multiplications. This gets even better if you also include the sparse weighting, and a Numenta white paper shows up to a 50x performance speedup on FPGAs. The con is you get a bit of a slowdown during training, and these are my best implementations of these things. The dense network, which has no sparsity, trains at 44 milliseconds per step or so. The K-winners network, that trains at about 60 milliseconds per step. Adding boosting adds another 10 to 20 milliseconds per step, depending on how much boosting we're pushing in, whether it's per CNN filter or for every single neuron output in the layer. I also observed that the peak accuracy would vary some, especially boosted per CNN filter would, it one time couldn't get past 90% accuracy, which was bizarre. But I haven't been able to reproduce that consistently because my compute power is limited and training takes 10 minutes or so per. So there are some related works in this area that weren't worked on by Numenta. The Max Out network by Ian J. Goodfellow uses a maximum output activation function with multiple different input weights to form a universal piecewise linear function approximator. And this allows it to approximate any activation function that could be useful, with the downside that the number of parameters in the network absolutely explodes because every single output unit has 3 or 4 weight matrices and biases, however many linear pieces you want it to approximate with. Second is enhancing adversarial defense by K-winners take all, which is an independent discussion of K-winners take all and its effects on reducing the ability for gradient-based methods to explore the interior of your existing network. And my reason for bringing that up is that it kind of raises a concern that it might break existing gradient-based distillation and explainability technologies, because the gradients that propagate through the network are now much more complicated. But it also points out something that the Numenta work shows, which is that despite being very hard on the gradients if you try to propagate through the network, it does not affect training or backpropagation in any way. All of these discontinuities in the piecewise linear behaviors aren't that bad at training time. They still have very smooth loss functions at training time. Loss, hill climbing reduction. And now my presentation is frozen up because I think we're at the end. Any questions?
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Can you explain why you thought there was an error again? What's wrong with this?
So if this was how the Numenta results expected it to be, the red curve would be at the top, and the blue curve would be at the bottom, and the green curve would be above the orange curve.
Boosts are calculated per CNN filter.
Yeah. So that one is, they believed that the different CNN filters would have different relevances, and so you would want to control for the activity of the CNN filter.
Oh, so each convolution matrix is off or on as opposed to each
Mm-hmm.
neuron.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so output neurons from a layer, you are using many CNN filters to produce those output neurons, and so you've got like a 16 by 16 by 32 grid of output neurons, but you only have 32 filters.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yeah, that's really nice. And how did you end up? How did you end up writing your tests? I guess I'm just curious because it seems really cool to customize the networks. I guess.
I just so I straight up wrote the networks in TensorFlow. I wrote layers that can be inserted into a Keras system. And oh wow, it's bringing up the notebook for me. I didn't expect that. So uh, here's the updating of the duty cycles, which is keeping a running average of the activity of each neuron. Let me zoom in a bit. Hide that crap. So this keeps a running average of the activities, and this actually implements the function. And I have a k-winners mask function, which I have up here, and that one makes a flat copy of the network and then returns a mask made using the nth largest element. So ties go to all members of a tie win per se,
Oh
which
wow!
is yeah.
I didn't even know you could make custom layers like this in TensorFlow.
Yeah, you can do that. And so then actually testing it is, here's my definition of the dense layer. And so I just took that definition of the dense layer and stuck my k-winners layer in, or my sparse layer, or the sparse per filter layer. Now, another mistake I might have made is you'll note that these sparse activations are immediately before a max pool. Numenta had theirs after the max pool, and I tested it with it after the max pool. Wait, these are supposedly those. Okay, I seem to have mixed up my experiments some, so we'll dig around with that later, but I just used the best performing, which was when we put the sparse before the max pool. And so what ends up happening is the max pool actually defeats some of that sparsity. Because if I have 2 by 2 sparsity, if you think about it, if 3 of those neurons aren't active anyway, and I just pull the one thing that is, then it doesn't come out right. So that's part of probably
Right.
my poor implementation, that sort of thing.
So they didn't use max pooling.
They
No,
they
wait, you said they
used
did.
max pooling, but they had the sparse layer after the max pooling, or
Right.
the
Okay.
sparse k-winners activation. I can pull up their paper and show where they made that messy table.
Was it like fairly clear designing the layers from the paper?
Designing the layers from the paper, yes. Designing the same networks, not at all, because they don't give the size of the. Actually, yeah, I could have properly replicated exactly the same networks. I just did not find this table when I was first going through.
No, that's not
Yeah,
a big.
and they're
I was just curious, like as to how well the documentation converted to like making your own layer.
so my trick for that was actually Numenta had their k-winners layer implemented in PyTorch, and so a lot of what I was doing was translating from PyTorch to the
Ah,
TensorFlow, because we're working with TensorFlow, and I thought it would help me learn some of the interior of TensorFlow. But yeah, this is the k-winners function. Wait, where is it? Let's update duty cycle, forwarding of the layer. No, this is the God, their organization was such a mess. Not the modules, the functions. There we go. So their k-winners layer, they did something different, which is they used top k. And I tried that in TensorFlow, but the performance was way worse. And they implemented with ties win anyway, so I moved it over to nth element in mine here, nth element.
So the sparse layer is just the k-winner algorithm plus the boosting kind
Yes.
of mechanisms. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then did they mention in terms of performance, how does this compare to just random dropout?
They did. Their tests were in comparison to dropout. I did not think to put the dropout layers in when I was designing mine.
So this actually outperforms the dropout.
Yes. I
Oh,
think that was the case.
okay.
It outperforms it at robustness at the very least. I don't know if it outperforms it in general.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, is this the table? MNIST results, yes. So you can see the sparse networks occasionally have reduced accuracy,
Yeah.
but they do have significantly higher noise rejection.
Right. Right. So I'm wondering, like, if we apply the same thing to more complex data set, like image data, will it still be will we
So,
see the
I
same
mean, we've been
results?
applying it to MNIST, which is technically image data. They also applied it to the Google Speech Commands dataset.
Mm-hmm. But like for those colored images, I feel like
Oh,
if
CFAIR
you
10, yeah.
yeah, I feel like there's sort of a distribution you want those pixels to be following.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah,
do not know.
right. That's just interesting to me.
Hmm.
Oh, so that's the graph you were trying to repeat.
Oh, yes, pretty much. Not exactly that, but close. Which I'm curious now which CNNs those were. What features each of them had. Sparse 2, they added significantly more sparsity, if I'm remembering correctly. Significantly sparser hidden layer, yeah.
So is this related to your class project?
My class projects.
Like one of the homework
For this class, no.
for other classes?
For other classes, yes.
Oh, I see.
ECE 284.
Mm.
I was actually going to send the video of this to my project partner to help him understand this stuff better.
Oh wait, that's the theoretical class, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Is
What's up?
So is this like a course project? You just find a topic of your own interests, or the teacher just wants you to explore specifically this paper?
It's find a topic of your own interest.
Oh, I see.
And this is a topic of my own interest because I've been following Numenta stuff for a while, and I thought it would be helpful here because I am curious to see how it performs with the text thing, and I was going to actually go play with that
Right.
in my
So
free time. Yeah,
is
what's up?
this published? The paper, is it published or it's just on the archive?
I'm not clear on that. I haven't found a copy elsewhere.
Mm.
But they have a white paper published on their website regarding the speed up.
Oh.
Wait, so you
So
were gonna
for
go ahead? Sorry.
oh, sorry, you go ahead.
And some of their older HTM work is published in Frontiers in Science.
I was just gonna ask, when you say you were gonna try it on the text thing, that was just gonna be with convolution still, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
So this Numenta company, how does they uh, utilize this in their, does they provide a API or they use it for some research purpose?
As far as I know, they are just researching it in the context of hierarchical temporal memory, which is their model for how they believe the neocortex works.
Oh, so it's a non-profit research organization.
I don't actually know if they're for profit, but they are, yes, a research organization.
Oh, gotcha.
Mhm.
Oh
Are you
gosh.
worried about copyright on it?
No, I'm just curious, like, if they wrote a paper, find out an idea like this, how are they gonna use it in practice? Or maybe they just don't, they just
My
doing it for
understanding is they
research.
don't. They are doing it
Yeah,
all for research, and they
yeah,
publish all their research meetings on YouTube even.
yeah, that's what I understand.
hmm
Pretty cool.
I do know some companies that have run off with some of their technology and made proprietary products. Cortical.io took the sparse distributed representation to do word embeddings, and I know
Oh,
at least one other company took their stock prediction tech and is trying to do fintech stuff. And another company took their server performance prediction technology, which was both of those are based on hierarchical temporal memory, which is
mm,
designed to do time series prediction.
mm,
And that time series prediction technology, I mean, is actually surprisingly effective. So they sent that out. The people started building little prototypes out of it, and then they started building it into real. Um, Here is an example. There's an NYC taxi passenger count prediction
oh,
because there's a huge data of passenger ride volumes in New York City. And so they were demonstrating, hey, we can predict forward with a relative degree of accuracy compared to moving averages and that sort of thing.
oh. So like the assumption for for example, the NYC taxi data, is
hmm
it because it comes with a lot of noises? So we wanna kind of,
Yeah, there's a lot of variability to people actually showing up in taxis in New York City.
oh,
And the
that's
idea
true.
isn't to take other parameters and produce a time estimation for the day. The
Mm,
idea is to try to actively predict forward just based on what the signal has done in the past, what will it do in the future? And so they
right.
also encode the time of year into what they give the hierarchical temporal memory.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, it can read into certain patterns like day of the week being relevant for how many passengers are going to be taking the taxis. And also some
Mm,
holidays it can just remember once it's been through a few years of data.
mm-hmm. All right.
Unfortunately, I mean, all of this being biologically based, it lacks good um, statistical bounding, which is why I wanted to focus on the sparse distributed representations where they had good statistical bounding rather than going off into, oh, look how cool it is, they can do time prediction.
Yeah, see what you're saying.
hmm